Okay, so then this is your upper airway, and again, this thing is that when you eat, which tube do you want it to go down? Your digestive tract or your respiratory tract? Again, you don't want it to go down into your respiratory tract because that's going to block your airways and cause you to aspirate, right? So that's why you have this structure right here. This epiglottis, this is kind of like a little switch in the railroad tracks. Thing is that at this point up here, both your digestive tract and your respiratory tract share these structures. But this is where the two start to diverge and take different paths. So if you want to breathe in air, you want it to go down this passageway. I mean, you can still get air in here. But if you're swallowing things, you definitely want it to go down your digestive tract, not your respiratory tract. Okay, so that's why we have our epiglottis, and your epiglottis is made out of cartilage. Now, so what I'm showing here is the epiglottis in the open stage, but again, if it's in the closed, like you're trying to swallow or drink something, you don't want the food or water getting into your airways. So that's why your epiglottis can actually be pushed down right here, or pushed and pulled down here to seal off your respiratory tract and prevent yourself from choking. But what do we see here is that there are many cartilage that supports your respiratory tract, and what we have here, especially this larynx, you notice that there's all these cartilage. So these aren't bones. They are sturdy. You can feel them. They have structure, but they're not hard like bones. And actually, this part right here, the hyoid bone. So if you were here last semester, you might remember that the hyoid bone is unique in that it actually doesn't touch another bone directly, but it anchors a lot of muscles, and it also has a lot of connective tissue as well. So here we have the hyoid bone. It anchors a lot of the muscles in your tongue, and actually in the previous picture, you can see the hyoid is also anchoring part of, like, connected to the epiglottis and other cartilages as well. So the hyoid, even it doesn't float in the middle of your body, like not tethered to anything. It's actually a very important anchor for many tissues and muscles in your body. And what we have here is your thyroid cartilage. Now, the thing about your thyroid cartilage, a common misconception is that it's protecting your cartilage or your thyroid. Your thyroid is actually a little above that. But your thyroid cartilage is named that because it's close to the thyroid, not because it's protecting the thyroid directly. And laryngeal prominence, well, you can kind of see it on me, right? So especially if you have a colloquially called an Adam's apple, that's your laryngeal prominence, this little ridge right here in the middle. That's the anatomical term for that. But notice that you have other cartilages that support your larynx as well. So your larynx, another name for that is your voice box, right? So this is why you have your vocal folds protected by your larynx. This is important in not only protecting the structures that produce the sound of your voice, but also remember, this is where it diverges from your oral cavity and your pharynx into your actual respiratory tract. So it makes sense to kind of have a lot of structure where that opening is. Otherwise, you're going to have trouble breathing and speaking, right? So again, you want that larynx to be intact. Now what we have here is the vocal folds, and I think in the OpenStax it just says vocal fold, but you should put vocal fold and glottis. So what we have here is like the glottis includes your vocal folds, but it also includes the opening between the vocal folds right here. And what we have here, so the Rhema Glottidis is this little opening right here, and vocal folds, or sometimes called vocal cords, this is your glottis. And this is what happens is that here we have a glottis in this closed position. So when it's closed, can air move past this closed position? Not really, unless you really try to push past it. I mean, but that's probably bad for your voice. And what we have here, when it's open, now you can have movement of air through this passage, right? So this is what we see, like it's closed and open. And by closing and opening it, that affects part of our speech. Our speech is also done in part due to our placement of our tongue and our mouth and our opening of the mouth, but this is very important in actually forming our speech. So what happens when you do have speech? Well, thing is that I like to think of the vocal folds kind of like a stringed instrument. If your vocal folds are very thick or if they're very stiff, it's going to produce a lower sound. Or if they're actually, if these folds are longer and larger, they're also going to be a lower frequency as well. So people who have very thick vocal folds or they have very stiff ones, they're going to have a lower voice with less resonance or vibration. And what we have here, if it's like very thin and very flexible, well, it's going to result in a higher pitched voice. So that's why, like, especially when boys grow up to become men and they undergo puberty, well, what happens to their larynx? Well, it enlarges, right? So like when a string gets longer and looser and wider, that causes it to the frequency of the sound to be lower. That's why most boys, when they experience after they're done with puberty, their voice drops because of that change in their vocal folds and their larynx. Okay, so then what we have here, so again, the glottis includes your vocal folds, and as air passes through this glottis, by this air vibrating and rubbing again, or actually like the vocal folds change the frequency of the air that's going through this passage. So this determines the pitch of our voice. So again, it's all due to the movement of air. And if you don't know what causes sound, I do have a lecture in the special senses. I think it's in PHYL 141 at the very end. So again, sound is vibration, whether it's through the air, through liquid, or ground. So by air moving past your vocal folds and causing vibrations, that produces sound. That affects the pitch of our voice. Now, what we see here is that this is actually a very interesting picture with the laryngoscope, but this is actually a slightly pathological picture. And what do we see that's kind of like pathological and diseased? Well, it's this part right, or actually, like before we get there, let's talk about this. So the cool thing about the glottis is that you might have heard this before. So say these, if I used to do this in class, but try to say this at home. So we have Honolulu, right? How about saying this? So if you're not here from the islands, if you didn't step on the islands, you might be like Punaluu, and like, no, you have to actually put a little break in it. Let's say Punaluu. And how about this? Ooh, I love having people like who have never spoken Hawaiian, a word of Hawaiian say this. But is it kawa? It's like, no, it's ka'ava. So you have to kind of break up the word. So what do you call this in Hawaiian? It's actually a letter in Hawaiian. It's what we call okina, and the more technical term for that is the glottal stop. So what's happening every time someone does a okina in Hawaiian? Well, the thing is that when they're speaking it, what happens is you kind of break up the vowel, right? It's not like holding the A or in ka'ava or holding the U in Punaluu. You break it up. So by doing a glottal stop, you're actually using not your mouth, not your tongue, but actually back here, you're kind of breaking up the flow of air. So every time you have a glottal stop, you're kind of like closing off that glottis. So every time you have a glottal stop, it's going to close it and open it up again. So people who are good at the glottal stop, or was it? Oh, I should put the meme in, but I was like, okay, in American English, we see bottle of water, right? But there was the one that says it put like a monocle and a top hat and a Union Jack in the background, and they say bottle of water, and I'm like, because I have a friend like my friend who's from London, and he grew up, or actually he's from Yorkshire, but it's funny, like he never says a double T. He has, instead of saying a T, he actually does a glottal stop. So he's like, oh, I thought that movie was a little shitty. He doesn't actually say the T. He actually just like does a glottal stop instead. So it's kind of funny that people from certain areas of the UK, they like to use a glottal stop instead of a T. Or they might say glottal stop. Yeah, bottle of water. They'll actually say, and I can make fun of him because he makes fun of my accent, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. When I'm over there, I'm the one with the accent. But yeah, that's what they're doing. They're doing a glottal stop every time they don't instead of a T.